Hey guys, welcome to remote learning for Tuesday, 9/1. Welcome to September. We are starting our first full day of our Africa unit. So we're going to start with West and Central Africa, and we're going to start by doing our atlas, or the physical features of West and Central Africa. So West and Central Africa have many different ecosystems, climates, and many different varied physical features. So one thing that West and Central Africa doesn't have, though, is a major mountain range. When it comes to the continents, most of them have some form of a major mountain range, and there's actually something called the Seven Peaks, which is the tallest mountain on every continent. So you have places like Mount Everest, and then the Himalayas, and for the continent of Africa, it's Mount Kilimanjaro, which is the smallest of the seven peaks. So Africa is relatively flat compared to other continents and has no major mountain range the same way that the United States has the Rocky Mountains or the Himalayas, or other places like in South America or Europe with the Alps. There are interesting features still, like drainage basins. So drainage basins are large areas that slope down into a flat land or a lowland, and those all are where rainfall feeds into a river or a lake. So you have these drainage basins, which are great areas for fertile land, lots of farming, and this is where you're going to see lots of population. Population will flock towards these areas that are very fertile and full of life and water. So speaking of water, there are a number of rivers, notable rivers in West and Central Africa, but there aren't that many lakes. So you think about places like America, we have the Great Lakes, and there's lots of places that have seas and rivers that feed into these seas or lakes. But West and Central Africa only has one notable lake, which is Lake Chad, which is in the country of Chad, obviously, but it's the only notable lake in the entire region, um, and it's right on the edge of the Sahel, which is Sahel, but it's pronounced Suh, heel, Sahel, Sahel. Pardon me. Which this means shore in Arabic. The reason that it's in Arabic and not some other more native African language is because we're going to talk about this later in the year. The Muslim Empire spread from the Middle East into lots of Africa, so you see a lot of these Muslim influences in parts of Africa, and this is one of them. So the Sahel, which means shore, so the area around Lake Chad and near Lake Chad is the shore, but it also serves as the shore for the Sahara Desert. So this is a somewhat dry or semi-arid area, and then the Sahara Desert is obviously very, very dry. It's a desert. It's incredibly arid. So it means it's very hot, no precipitation, rocky, sandy soil in the area, and very few people. The population in these areas is very little. So, like I said, there are a couple notable rivers. So we have first the Niger River in parts of Nigeria, and then Western Africa. Uh, so this is one of the two large rivers. The other is the Congo River, which is the second largest river in Africa, and feeds into the rainforest along the equator. So we have the Central African rainforest, and we have the Congo River that feeds through it. Both of these are major artery rivers, which means that there are other rivers that branch off from it. So if you think you have one long river, and then from it, a bunch of ones diverge and go off into separate areas. And so this is what feeds a lot of these, the drainage basins. So all the water from rainfall comes and collects into these rivers, and then they go out and they spread off, and then they create a lot of great usable farmland for the people in West and Central Africa. In the same way that West and Central Africa has a lot of different geographic features and physical features, like the drainage basins and the rivers and the rainforest and the desert, we have a lot of different climates in this area as well. So we have in the north, we have the Sahara Desert, which I mentioned earlier, and this is a very dry, arid, like I said. And then if we look at the equator, which runs through the middle of this region, if we look at the equator, we have a tropical wet rainforest along the equator. And then as you go north or south into the area, we see that it starts to get cooler. The temperature starts to decrease and the amount of precipitation starts to decrease. That's because the airflow around the equator creates a lot of rainfall. And so that's why you often see tropical rainforests in these areas. So places like the Amazon are close to the equator, and the Central African Republic, or the Central African rainforest, pardon me, is along the equator. And then as you get further away, you start to see the temperature decrease. It's still incredibly hot in these areas, but just not as hot. And then they get slightly less rainfall. So instead of rainfall year round or nearly year round, they will get seasons that are a little less wet and a little bit more dry. So that is our tropical wet and dry. And then as we go farther away in the north, we get to the Sahel, which is a semi-arid area. And then in the south, we get towards our grasslands. So this is where we have a lot of those wildlife reserves, and we can see different types of animals start to come into play. Slightly less people because the area isn't as suitable for farming. But in the north, as we start to get away from the equator and our large rainforest, we start to see more area that is suitable for farming because we have all these drainage basins and it's along the coast. So there's a lot of water in this area, which creates the fertile land. Like I was mentioning earlier, we have a lot of different areas, and a lot of these areas are either suitable or not suitable for farming. So a large portion of Africa is not arable, which means it's not farmable. So these areas are places where they have to resort to some other form of extraction or resources that they can use to make profits and sustain life or have some reason to form cities in these areas. And that main reason is some sort of precious mineral or material. So a lot of places will focus on mining, so gold, different ores, diamond mines, and then you also see oil and petroleum in these areas. So the places where there's more oil and petroleum or more diamonds, you'll see more mines and then more wealth, because businesses will come in. And then in the past, colonists and European colonists came in and established this ground level of infrastructure that could be used to get all the mines set up and then transport all the resources to another area. And so those can be used now as a way for like roads and train tracks and stuff like that, so that they can move resources or just move from place to place, and it allows for larger populations in these areas. So like I said, we have gold, diamonds, oil, and then we also have copper and hydroelectricity. So we have the Niger River and the Congo River. Those are both very strong, powerful rivers, and since they're so strong, they can be used to power things like dams and create hydroelectricity to power cities and towns in the region. So tapping these resources helps the economy in the area. So it helps the economy of whatever country the ores or mines are in, but it also helps the cities in the area and the people that are working there. But it also hurts the environment. So it's good and bad. So part of it is good because it helps their economy. Part of it is bad because it really hurts the environment. All the heavy machinery coming through, and then them taking stuff out of the ground plays a big impact on the environment. So one of the things that we see in this is desertification. Big word. Desertification is the stripping of the land and draining of its resources, and it essentially makes an area more like a desert. So it dries up a lot of the land and makes it inhospitable for plant life and animal life, and changes the climate and the ecosystem of the area. So in parts, the tapping of these resources and extraction of these precious minerals and valuable materials and resources has led to desertification, but it also has led to deforestation. So they have to clear out a lot of area for all these mines and whatnot. And so part of that is deforestation. And then you can see that even more in the rainforest, like we can see in the Amazon rainforest, and we talked about last week with climate change and how we interact with the environment. Deforestation also happens in Africa with the Central African rainforest, which is the second largest rainforest in the world. So this also hurts animal populations in the area, because if you think about changing an environment drastically, either in desertification or deforestation, or having a serious impact on the animal population in the area. Speaking of animal populations, let's talk a bit about the human population, which you may be thinking, Mr. Morgan, we're talking about the geographic features and the physical features of West and Central Africa. Why are we talking about the population? Well, population and population density and the different cultures in an area play a large part in geography. And so we look at maps and we can see, using a special purpose map, we can see the types of religions in an area, or just where people are located, and that is a part of geography. We need to discuss what kind of people are in West and Central Africa to get a better understanding of West and Central Africa. So environments impact not only what people do for a living, so whether they're farmers or whether they're mining something or whatever, it also has an impact on where people live. So if you think about the rainforest is very wet. It's hard for people to live there. It's hard for people to farm or get resources if it's constantly raining. And then on the other side, we have the desert, the Sahara Desert. It's hard for people to farm, get resources, or find water, or even hunt in the Sahara Desert, because there's no one there, and it's very hot, dry. And so you have to live in a place where it is somewhere in between this incredibly hot wet area or this incredibly hot dry area. And so you see people around the drainage basins, and so along rivers. It's all about water. So the coastline has a lot of major cities on it. The Ivory Coast and the Gulf of Guinea have major cities along it, and then we have the Niger and the Congo River, which have a lot of cities on it as well. And so they all flock towards these certain areas. And so if we look at a population density map, we can see that it's a lot of empty space and then very dense pockets. And it's almost like if you look at a population density map of America, you see lots of open places in areas like North Dakota and Montana or Idaho, where you think it's a lot of empty open land. And then you see a place like LA or Chicago or New York, and it's like a really like clear, this is where everybody is. Or if you look at a map of Nevada, it's a bunch of empty nothingness, and then Las Vegas, and there's pretty much nothing outside of Las Vegas. And it's pretty similar. You see pockets along rivers and along the coast, and then other than that, you really don't see a large amount of people anywhere in the region. So places with more water means fertile land and also higher population of people. And like I said, if we look at a map, small pockets along rivers and near coasts. So this is where we see the major cities in the area. So these cities offer new ways of life and education to the people. So they offer a chance at potentially a better life than what they would get if they stayed in their small towns and villages and just doing the farming and the way of life that they had been doing up until this point, but it also offers some bad sides. So one thing is that cities are growing so rapidly that they can't build at fast enough rate, and so they become overcrowded and overpopulated, and people live in very poor conditions, and so it has a negative impact because of that. But then you also see, because of things like that, people living in poor conditions, it leads to higher crime rates, higher usage of illegal materials and drugs and things of that sort, and just poor living conditions, dirty, not enough food for everyone, not enough jobs for everyone. So you see very impoverished people, both in the outskirts where there isn't enough resources and people are just managing to get by, and then you see the same thing in the major cities. So it's good in the outskirts because it's a stable way of life for a lot of people, but it's also bad in some ways. And then if we go to the major city, it's a chance at a new life, but it also could end up bad there because of overcrowding and overpopulation. So an important thing to keep in mind when we talk about Africa, or at least an important thing that we would be amiss to gloss over or not mention at all, is that of disease. So when people think of places in Africa, they often think that they are plagued by diseases, which they very much so are. So there's two main types of diseases that we're going to talk about here. Both are caused by insects. So certain bugs thrive in hot, wet climates, which you think about places like West and Central Africa along the coast, and then around the rainforest, just either north or south of the rainforest. They're very hot and they're very wet, and so bugs and insects thrive in this sort of climate, and so you see a lot of them, and because of that, you see a lot of disease. So the first one is the tsetse fly. So this is a fly that spreads something called sleeping disease, or no, I'm sorry, sleeping sickness, which can be given to cattle and humans and is incredibly deadly in either one of the two. So sleeping sickness forces people to move from areas to certain other areas in order to raise cattle and other livestock, simply because of this. And then it just in general makes it hard for people to live in areas where there's an overabundance of these tsetse flies. And so it spreads a lot of disease that way. And the other one, which people may know a little bit more about, is malaria. Malaria is the more talked about one, spread through mosquitoes. Mosquitoes, like the tsetse fly, thrive in these hot and wet climates. You think about in America, when you start to see mosquitoes, it's after spring, it's rained a bunch, and then it starts to get warm, and you see all the mosquitoes start to come out and bother you. So some of these are treatable and preventable, so it's possible to take medicine to get rid of malaria and prevent malaria from, happening and from contacting or contracting malaria. But because a lot of West and Central Africa and just Africa in general are very impoverished, they aren't able to uh, afford the medicines, and drug companies are not willing to send a lot of medicine that way. They make it a lot higher because they're afraid that people in these areas aren't going to be able to afford the full treatment, or they're not going to be able to take the full treatment correctly because they're very complicated. It's not like once a day you take a vitamin. It's very at this time and this time and this time in a day you have to take it, or else it doesn't work. And so they're very high cost because of that, and because there's such a high cost, they people can't afford the medicine at all. There are some methods in place in order to try and lessen the spread of things like malaria and sleeping sickness. So one of the things is some education methods. So doctors will go through small towns and villages and educate people about how sleeping sickness is contracted and malaria is contracted, and they'll try and educate them so that they know, like, okay, when this happens, you need to you're going to be really tired and you need to make sure that you take care of it and not work at this time rather than just try and push through it and make it worse. And that way they can try and treat it and lessen the amount of people who pass away from things like malaria or sleeping sickness. Other things is global outreach programs, giving mosquito nets to places like this allow people a safe place that they can sleep or live in where they're not going to be as worried about getting affected by mosquitoes or tsetse flies. And then when people go and visit the areas and do outreach programs, they have to take a bunch of different medications in order to make sure that they don't contract it on their visit to Central and Western Africa. That is all of the physical features and geography for Western and Central Africa. So I want to touch on a couple of things. Tomorrow we're going to be going over the map. So we went over the geography of the area, but we need to learn where the countries are in certain parts of Western and Central Africa. And so tomorrow we're going to be making our map of this. So we may not put it in the ISN. Right now I think we are, but I think it works better for a map like this if we draw it out rather than just add it and label it into our ISN. We might do one where we label it in our ISN at a different date, but I'm not sure what we're going to do yet. I haven't decided. I want to touch on the African mass too. So yesterday we had a couple of videos. I was told that some of them weren't working. So I think at least one of them did. And so that one video talks a little bit about African mass. So what we're going to do is we're going to make our own African mask. These can be just things that you have around the house. So it could be something as simple as cardboard from a box from something you bought on like Amazon, or it can be, people have done things with milk jugs. Cut the milk jug, like wash it so it doesn't smell, obviously. Cut the milk jug and then paint it so that it looks like a mask. Or you can go to a place like a Hobby Lobby or a party supply store, some sort of arts and crafts store, or one of the two, and you can buy a mask for like $5, and then you can use that, paint it. So you have a number of options. You don't have to go out and buy a bunch of things in order to get this done. The one thing that you are going to have to do is some sort of like paint. So this can be just like a cheap like Crayola paint that you can get at like a Walmart for a couple of dollars, or even that you might be able to find at like a dollar store. So it doesn't have to be anything super fancy. And the main idea about it is just learning about African mass and then getting to do something fun. I don't know how virtual students are going to present their masks, not like give a presentation, but just how I'm going to get them from you guys. So it may just be something where you have to send me some pictures, or you guys can come and drop it off at the school at some point, but we'll figure that out at a later date. We're going to have a couple of weeks to work on this, so it's not anything that you really need to worry about now. I think that is it for the day. If you have any questions, let me know. I'm going to be putting all of the missing work in as zeros and making sure I get through all the grading for everything on Canvas. So if you see on Skyward that you have a 0 in something and it says 0 and missing, make sure that you went in on Canvas and submitted it, or that you actually did it. If you happen to see that it is submitted on Canvas and it's graded on Canvas, but it's not in Skyward, shoot me a message and I will take care of it. Other than that, I hope you guys have a great day. I will see you guys tomorrow when we work on our maps, and then start talking about some other parts of Western and Central Africa. Okay, have a nice day. Bye.